In the laws of nature, there is nothing impossible except that the state of your mind makes it so. It's marvellous they're intelligent enough to recognise that every so often I come up with some interesting, intelligent statements. Maybe if they weren't so daft, they would see all of it as interesting information. Cleaning up this planet is going to be a big job. If we're going to get the climate back to what we want, a lot of work got to be done. But one thing is certain, you need energy. That's important.
Without John, I wouldn't be the man I am today. John changed my entire life. Turned it around completely.
The man is the most honest, sincere friend that you could ever hope to have. He has tremendous stamina and has almost an unheard of ability to go without sleep. He operates on between, I think, 3 and 4 hours max.
For 40 years, I have been searching to find the clue to the Searle effect. But what it did for my mind, it stimulated it, motivated it, and turned my whole life upside down.
I've met Professor Searle and his associates. They're nice people. Clearly, they believe in the SEG and the effects that they're talking about.
Basically, the design is a conventional generator.
Searle, according to Searle, tapped into zero-point energy without knowing how he did it.
Here we had something we couldn't understand. It wasn't doing what I wanted. That's what a generator wanted.
The only person that I know of who has ever succeeded in making a Searle effect generator, which it was named by someone else, given that name by someone else, but the only person I ever know who ever made one is John Searle.
The problem is the people, they want to see the disc fly. I think 69 to 71. The German TV sent a report in color, and there was shown a flyable disc. It was hovering in the top of the trees, I think 25 meters.
The electron flow is accelerated to an extremely high rate, and it creates a vacuum around the device. And in that vacuum, you develop numbing cold. And numbing cold, as we know today, is a function of superconductivity. It also, which has not been known, a function of gravitational force.
This thing wanted to fly.
For over 60 years, John Searle has tried to give to the world a new kind of energy system, one that would free mankind from the burdens of oil and fossil fuels. From his dreams as a child in pre-World War II England came an understanding of mathematics and magnetic forces that would change his life. From a childhood game of hopscotch came a new understanding of magic squares, a mathematical principle that is 5,000 years old. John Searle is deaf. His deafness is the result of beatings and neglect suffered as a child. But the isolation would serve his purpose. Perhaps this physical limitation accounts for his freedom of thinking. He could think laterally and not be bound by conventional rules taught through conventional methods that may have an adverse effect on the human mind. In his quiet universe, his experience would have a different effect, an unusual effect, a natural effect, the Searle effect. On his own, and without any real formal education, John Searle is possessed by an insatiable curiosity that would lead him to conclude that nothing is impossible except that which the state of your mind makes it so. John Searle is known all over the world as the inventor of the Searle effect generator, a magnetic device consisting of one or more rings, also called plates, and a number of cylindrical rollers that, when in motion, generate electricity.
The generator is a magnetic device that is totally magnetic. It is its own prime mover. It will self-start and continue to run, and as far as we know, we could say never stop.
The Searle effect is an effect based on magnetic fields that generate the continual motion of magnetized rollers around magnetized rings, producing electric energy.
The generator runs in harmony with nature. The law of the squares is harmony with nature.
But the Searle effect is a great deal more than a simple generator. In our polluted and energy-starved world, it is the hope of all mankind that we find the solutions that lead us to both prosperity and harmony with nature. Is it possible to maintain mankind's industrial output and at the same time reduce the pollutants that are slowly killing planet Earth? Is there a way to increase the productivity of the human species as we rid ourselves of the poisons and recover the waters of this world?
If we're going to get the climate back to what we want, a lot of work got to be done. One thing is certain, you need energy. That's important, and it must be cheap as possible. Preferable, no pollution.
No noise, no heat, no vibration, no pollution. The Searle effect generator. The perfect machine?
As you build this, when you find out that it runs without friction, it runs without a governor, will accept any load and meet it. It will dive down in temperature at one point if you build it correctly and actually levitate and actually lift off the Earth, developing its own gravitational field. When you see all these things and you realize that this is a perfect machine. It is an entity. It's the closest thing to a living thing that man can make.
Does John Searle have the answer? Is John Searle's invention the point of impact between the question, what if there is a machine that could save mankind, and the answer, the Searle effect generator?
People say, well, you can't do this. You're going to upset the entire world economy. The whole economy is based on oil. We have, and it works, they're saying. Well, it works very well for the people who are running the economy, but not necessarily for everyone else. I still maintain that it will not ruin the economy. It will be a very strong paradigm shift, much the same as the shift from horse and buggy to automobile.
Surely this point of impact would produce energy of its own, human energy, emotional energy, joy, relief, hope, wonder, or perhaps the darker side of human emotions, greed, hate, and jealousy.
All these years I've learnt one thing: you can't trust anyone with this technology. They want to steal it. And any worker seeing this and find out how it works could sell it to another company for millions.
Because this too is the Searle effect. John Roy Robert Searle was born at the Downs, a workhouse, a place of disgrace in Wantage, England, on May 2nd, 1932. Ironically, that same year, Werner Heisenberg of Germany was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for the creation of quantum mechanics. Put simply, quantum mechanics is the study of the relationship between energy and matter. In particular, the relationship between electrons and photons, the area in which the actual Searle effect takes place.
It's photons. That's the role of grounding their energy to the coil. It is simply throwing photons out. That is what you see trapped in the magnetic field around it.
John's father, Robert Henry Searle, and mother, Violet Gertrude Maud Pierce, would have 2 more children. John's sister Iris would arrive in 1934, and his brother Peter came sometime after. Robert claimed that Peter was not his child, and one evening he just never came home. Violet was abandoned, and soon after would be sentenced to jail for neglecting the children. A warrant was issued for Robert, but he was never found.
As a child, it appears from all official records, I was ill-treated. and bashed about, and in the end the courts placed me in the care of Dr. Bernardo Holmes in England, who then put me out to foster parents.
John would lose contact with his brother and sister. He would be placed in foster homes, the first one at the Chestnuts, Suffolk County, England. Here he would be the responsibility of 2 women.
There wasn't any man at the Chestnut. The school did not have no male teachers, so there's no male to force me into believing anything or do anything.
Later in life, John would insist that being raised by women would be one of the most beneficial aspects of an otherwise difficult and at times brutal childhood.
Now, I never knew the ABC. I couldn't do sums, I couldn't do anything, basically. Nobody cared about me. What they didn't know was I have no hearing. So they were wasting their time talking to me. So they beat me. Like, if that would help, that made no difference.
The 1930s were a time of Great Depression and great breakthroughs. Albert Einstein's contribution E equals mc squared made way for huge strides in science. Very soon, abstract mathematical proofs would replace ether theory as the best explanation of all things and their relativity. Others, like Nikola Tesla, would cling to the idea that energy was all around us and that we could access this energy and transport it through the atmosphere without the need for meters or utility companies. Relativity would win the day, and ether theory would become a relic of the past. It would soon be known as archaic physics. While the greatest minds of the 20th century uncovered theories about how the universe works, far beneath this lofty exchange, 4-year-old John Searle was dreaming. His dreams were specific and repeated. 2 dreams that would alternate 4 times a year over the next 6 years.
I had dreams, and those dreams are the key to all the work which I do. In fact, they're the key to all my knowledge.
The dreams were actually recurring nightmares that frightened John as a boy. He would remember them, but not understand their meaning until the right time.
You wake up screaming. My mother said that's the devil. That's my foster mother. So she'd give me a good belting to belt the devil out of me.
He finished his schooling at Thorndon Infant in 1942. He then entered Eye Secondary School in Suffolk County, England. John would leave Suffolk County in 1944. He was transferred to Russell Coates Naval School in Dorset. There he trained to take his part in the war effort. By 1946, the war was over. John left naval school. He got his first job at British Rewind's electrical repairs and boarded at number 30 Crawley Road in London.
That was the first job I was given by the Dr. Bernardo Holmes. They placed me there as apprentice for electrical engineering.
This would be the turning point in the life of John Searle. The Searle effect is developed from the law of the squares, and it is from these squares that John Searle developed his generator and flying discs. But it didn't stop there. Over the course of his lifetime, John Searle's understanding of the squares would be used by him to explain all aspects of life in the universe. From DNA to relativity, from single-celled life to the human being, from transportation to construction of buildings, the squares could be used to understand everything.
When I took up my training as an apprentice electrical engineer, about the third day I was presented a docket to take to the stores, and I saw this tube with a small tube buff. I asked the foreman what that meant. He said, that's 2 squares. So I said, well, what is 2 squares? So he draws 2 by 2, show me 4 squares. 4. And I said to him, it doesn't make sense to me. What on earth do we have empty squares for? If it's a square, there must be some value there. You can take a square, if you run the numbers in normal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that is uniform in. But when you total them up, each row, each column, each diagonal, you'll find they add up different. Putting numbers in random we come up with a uniform output. Every line, every column, the two diagonals come out precisely the same.
Random numbers in squares will produce a uniform total. John Searle would soon call this the law of the squares, nature's way of achieving order from chaos. This led to Searle's revelation and gave meaning to his recurring nightmare.
At the age of 14, I looked at my dream. It's a game you all probably know. We call it hopscotch. The first dream, as I call it, is going to school. On my way to school, a 1.5 mile walk, I would pick up all the children, and just before we get to the school gate, we have what we call a hopscotch patch on the road itself. And it consists of 3 squares, 4, 5, then the odd one 6, then 7 and 8. Now, it's always that type of pattern, and there's a reason for it. I obviously been playing with all the children. It's now my turn. I've reached the point where I throw the pebble in square 3. I have hopped to square 2. My left leg is firmly on the ground. The right leg is now up in the air, about to move across square 3, where the pebble is, into square 4. Suddenly, all the children vanish. In the picture now comes an entirely different ingredient of a steamroller. The village steamroller, the only mobile object I've seen outside a horse and cart. This time it's coming at me from the top of the squares towards me, and it's many times bigger. We have the roller done in 2 massive sections. And it's coming to me and it's saying, stop, think, act. If not, you had it. It's telling me by my leg movement that it's not square 3 I need. Go to square 4. It's square 4 that you've got to calculate out the ingredients. Here is the story of how to do it mathematically. And of course the dream was telling me everything I wanted to know, but I had to find those answers. I had to relate what the dream was saying to what I was trying to do. So it was a slow, tedious job. And of course I got the sums wrong on a number of occasions on the start.
From those numbers, John Searle had the exact amount of each ingredient in the rollers and rings of his generator.
Now, every one square represents a quantity of a material. And that's very important. This is precisely how I developed the SEG. So I copy nature in every way. I work at trying to think how nature's doing it, and then produce this object.
The first recurring nightmare had become a dream with meaning. Searle's revelation continued with his second recurring nightmare.
This time it relates to what I'm doing on the way back from school. Here, my job in the evening, after I changed my clothes and had a meal, I have to put the ladder up to the loft, the shed, open the door, get the straw, go and bed the hens down for the night. Now, when I get up this ladder, which is many times longer than normal, the door opens, and now instead of bales of straw, straw stems are laid out as struts of a structure. I am now standing towards the middle part of all this structure. Then suddenly the rim is blazing away afar, so massive that no one could put it out, and it's all around me. But something says, have no fear. You'll be lifted out from the center of that flame.
John would interpret the second dream to mean that the device would be circular and have many struts moving out from the center to the rim. Climbing the long ladder meant understanding the infinite combinations of numbers in squares. Then he would break through the trap door and be at the center of the ring made of straw. The fire meant that there would be great energy at the rim of the device. World War II had ended, brought about by the most devastating weapons ever conceived. the product of those lofty minds who 20 years earlier wondered what would happen if you hit a single atom hard enough. What kind of energy was stored in this tiny place? The answer, they thought, is the source of all energy in the universe. The practical answer was bang. In fact, the biggest bang mankind could ever devise.
Einstein opened the door a bit further. Like most people, they come up with a wonderful formula. Einstein did. And then he stops at that and says, there's no way you can get this massive energy out of an atom. The cost would be too high. It's not worth it. Then you see you get another person comes along and thinks about this. Oh, no, just bump it with a proton or a neutron.
His job at British Rewinds introduced John Searle to some of the vocabulary he would use the rest of his life. Words like volts, ohms, amps, and watts.
The first job that really got the dream moving. And it was a simple task in Gravesend Road at the British Rewind Limited, where I was apprentice, and my job was to learn to strip motors, strip the coils, measure them, and count the turns, and then remake a new coil and put back, and the rotors as well. So I came into connection with motors for the first time, electric motors.
By 1946, John Searle had a different idea. How could this energy be tapped without smashing the atom into bits? His idea was a completely new generator design.
We didn't call them solar effect generators then, but we were just trying to produce a generator to run the house lights on. Something simple, because I felt that the big generators at the power stations were a waste of money. Would present to us vast pollution problems in the future. So the whole idea was to get something simple, not difficult to produce, and produce electricity.
Basically, the design is a conventional generator as far as how it looks. You've got a magnet passing by a coil, and all generators of electricity are based on magnetics and coils. You can pass a coil by a magnet or a magnet by a coil, but that gives you your deflection in the electron flow and the force in one direction.
I already knew most of the fundamentals. What I was doing here was trying to get rid of the petrol engine or other devices to turn the generator. That was the objective.
This led to his first experiment conducted at home on a kitchen table with his landlady present.
So what do you remember?
I remember here we must have had the house here because I'm looking at the distance at the end of the road. And then it was this side all right, and I think it must be in this area. And it's gone.
The first model that was built by John Searle at the age of 14 and a half, after receiving some inspirational dreams, was assembled on a kitchen table with his landlady's permission. And he put it together and then started to load it as a generator. So let's put a light on it. Let's put a cooker on it. Let's put an iron on it. Let's see what it'll hold and how much it'll do before it bogs down, heats up, and burns up.
Of course, that was a bad thing to do, indoors. They should always do experiments outside, as I discovered.
Well, as he increased the load, at a certain point, the temperature at that time mysteriously dropped down to close to 4 Kelvin, which is almost absolute zero. And when it did that, it became superconductive, developed its own gravitational field, we found later, and hit the ceiling.
And it was on the ceiling. And I said to the landlady, I said, that's a stupid thing. What's it doing up there? She said to me, you told me nothing would happen. And it had cracked the plaster, because they plaster ceilings. It hit really with force, and it was holding that.
Carrying all of the wiring and the cookers and the irons behind it, dangling down.
So I, stupid enough, got a ladder, go on it, grab it, and then I couldn't let go of it.
And as a result, his hands froze to the framework. So the landlady put a screwdriver in to stop it. And luckily it didn't shatter it. And then get his hands off of it. And that was the first experience of it levitating.
Twice he conducted the same experiment at number 30 Crawley Road, London, England, and both times had the same startling result.
Now I thought, well, lead is heavy. Let's put some lead on the bottom.
Yeah.
That'll keep it down. Again, I found I was wrong. I've now increased the weight, I've increased the density, now there was more energy. And it went down quicker. Not only did it go quicker, floors are stressed downwards, never upwards. The force to hit it split through the plaster timber, out through the tiles. The tiles were also stressed inwards, not outwards. And it just went through like shelling a pea, and out and away.
Where'd it go?
We don't know. Just all we know, just went on and on, but not right away. When it was clear the building, it hovers. And that's where trouble number 2 comes in. You see, people had the sets off, radio sets off. They were off, absolute turned off. When that starts to glow, the radio sets all come on. Though then you haven't turned them on. They come on full blast. And the din it makes. And of course, I wasn't a very popular man. It eventually shot away. And I was taken to the police station and given a free home accommodation.
His new idea about tapping the energy of the atom resulted in the destruction of his home at 30 Crawley Road.
It was an accident that happened, not intended or planned. Unfortunate, some people didn't like it. And they chucked me into a place where I'd be secured and wouldn't blow holes through roofs and that again.
What was happening to cause this simple generator design to quickly overload and lift off the kitchen table? Apparently, this was a new idea, but even the inventor could not explain what happened.
It was a learning curve I was being forced to follow. What it wanted to know was how electric motors were done, how they were wired and that, and the relationship. There are 2 key issues.
The 2 key issues are electrons and magnetic fields. John Searle understood the basic principles for generating electricity. He knew electricity was made up of electrons traveling down the wires into our homes.
To generate, you've got to have electrons for motion, great motion. That's why you go to the rare earth.
The basic components, the primary component is a rare earth. And it can be, although it can be any of the rare earths, the component that we use is neodymium. That's element number 60 on the periodic chart. And that unit puts out an excess of electrons for some reason. And it will also replenish them very easily.
Rare earth is the greatest weight of the whole materials that you're using. That has got to hold the mass of electrons.
John Searle's idea was to find a way to ease those spare electrons out of the structure and use them. Instead of smashing the atom into bits, why not tap this vast electron reservoir by using magnetic fields, same as any generator of that time?
So I say to myself, if you can release all the energy with a simple particle, surely we could ease it out gently by tunneling it in and giving it something to run up. So if we put a straight line, magnetic line, through and the electron spins around, all this energy is spinning around and come out, we'll get a constant flow.
Tunneling into the atom using a specific magnetic field will cause the electrons to move in one direction, and they can be collected and used.
With production of electricity, you have 2 choices. You either rotate the magnetic field, or you rotate the conductors. In our case, we prefer to rotate the magnetic flux. So as the roller rotates, it's also rotating around the base plate.
To make his generator work, John Searle had to overcome many problems. Most of these occurred with the shape and design of his magnets and in the behavior of their magnetic fields. How can you make a round magnet orbit another round magnet without stopping or flying off? He studied the behavior of a bar magnet and around magnet.
There's something wrong with it. It's got a turning action on it. It tormented me. That must be able to go straight. If the dream's saying, slice the roller into 8 segments, now it will keep straight. Well, I did this, I placed it on, and it kept straight. And not only did it keep straight, it freely moved up and down. What happens if you make a ring?
He knew magnetic fields could be impressed or printed on certain materials using a magnetizer, a device common to shops and factories that use magnets, such as British rewinds.
The question that baffles scientists is why, when 3 was on, they just run round and round. The picture here was there was 2 states involved here, and of course there is.
The 2 states referred to the 2 magnetic fields printed at right angles to each other. Both the roller and the plate had independent magnetic fields, one vertical and the other radial from the center to the rim.
Clearly, the magnetic field was completely different to the magnetic fields we knew of. For some reason, why they were different at the time, I had no idea.
The intersection of these 2 fields produces a wave that carries the roller around the ring, although this wave was unknown at the time the phenomenon was present.
So we got fields at right angles. That's why the whole thing moves. If you have got 2 fields, it won't move.
Now the 2 key issues for the production of electricity were present in a totally new generator design. The electrons were available in the rare earth material. The magnetic fields induced the roller to run on the plate.
We didn't even know what the field looked like till a few years ago in Germany when we remade a segment. I said, well, let's have a look at this field. And we dusted it with very fine iron dust, shook off the surface. Do you know what that looked like? A bicycle wheel, exactly as it was laid out in the shed in the dream. That is the field that makes this work. Any other field won't work. That field does it.
So we know that the magnetic field can be set to perform functions. Quite different to what we were taught in my day at school. And I think we're only scratching the surface of magnetism.
Was this thing a generator? It created an extremely high voltage, but John Searle had no control over it whatsoever. With each experiment came a new set of questions.
I was only looking for a generator, but it obviously was a generator that wanted to fly. So I had to put a body to it. There was no sense of just throwing it away and forget it. It was to put a body to it, hoping that that would solve some of the problems.
The unit that went through the roof at 30 Crawley Road was crude by comparison to later models.
1946, just before Christmas that last one was done, so I had a good Christmas.
What came next for John Searle would be a lifetime spent on the study of this phenomenon, soon to be known as the Searle effect.
When I started this technology, there was absolutely nothing to turn to in book form or scientific formulas by which it could be decided. In fact, I had to rely on dreams as a child. These dreams, which were nightmares, now were going to be changed into a world reality.
John Searle was learning to match pieces of knowledge with his dreams as he began his lifelong effort to explain the startling result each time he powered up his generator.
Lack of education as a child was actually useful to me because I now had to look at things and question what I saw.
In 1950, he enlisted in the Royal Air Force and was stationed at an airfield in Suffolk. By 1952, John Searle was back in civilian clothes. He boarded at the home of George Haynes, a terminal cancer patient in the West Midlands.
He was a very highly religious person. He was dying of cancer, and he said he wouldn't die in hospital, he'd want to go home.
Every night I went up to his bed at 8 o'clock to listen to him telling me about the Bible and that, and then he'd ask me what my interest was, and I told him about this. He said, John, If you can make people look up in the sky, he said, because they're always walking with their heads down, I will pay the cost of doing it.
So he called his son up and said, on Wednesday, take John down to Wednesbury to the government sales, market sales of government equipment. Get everything he wants.
Here came the first real opportunity to build his generator as a flying disc and observe the phenomenon.
So we got the shed, cables, and all the sort of bits and pieces one needs to do some experimenting. And eventually we made the first 3-footer. We piled it up, and of course it sort of hovered there of some yards above the treetops. Radio sets all switches on in the area. And then it shot off, and the radio sets went dead again. So I went up to the room, I said to him, sorry, we've lost it. Did the people look up? I should think so. Make another one.
From his deathbed, George Haynes Sr. financed the earliest experiments on the flying disc generator. Searle tried to keep the 3-foot disc from shooting off into space.
I said to him, I cannot control it. Oh, don't worry, son. Make the people look up. We did, all right. There was no ifs or buts about that point. Though I tried different ideas each time to try to overcome this lifting effect, I never won.
6 flying discs were built, and all 6 were lost.
We had to do 6 before the man died. Each one we were trying different ideas, and we couldn't solve the problem. We lost them. The last one we had a 60-ton shear pin connected, but even that sheared and was lost. From then on we had a break. The old man died. The other chap told me to get out of the house. I wasn't wanted there, so I moved on to other accommodation. So for a couple of years, nothing happened. Then, where I was staying, a man wrote the electric board and said that this man is very clever in magnetics and electrics. I would like you to interview him for a possible job.
John Searle, at age 21, is made foreman, part of a 3-man team in charge of 11 areas in research and development at Midlands Electricity Board.
There was 3 of us in the team. We were in charge of 11 areas. All technical problems which they couldn't solve at the workshops came to us to carry out the research on.
Research and development at Midlands Electricity Board. This was a perfect fit. Just like it was at British Rewinds, electrical engineers and experts in magnetism and electricity again surround him. He could tap their knowledge and begin to understand this phenomenon of the flying disc generator. John Searle made a critical decision to investigate what it was and not what he wanted it to be.
Before we reach that point where we can say, right, we can now design you a generator, how much output you want, and we'll get down and design it for you. We had to check and find a lot more little steps, a lot of other little problems we had to try to identify. This thing wanted to fly. So to me then, the easiest thing was to work on a body. Let it fly.
While I've been playing with equipment, I've uncovered a lot of things which I suspected but couldn't prove.
Whenever possible, John Searle engaged in dialogue with anyone willing to share their knowledge on things mechanical and especially things magnetic or electric. In March 1953, Searle married Doris Shirley Foster. They would have 6 children. Family life would be difficult. He was consumed by the phenomenon of the flying disc generator.
Now, I was at the headquarters of the Midlands Electricity Board. I had 11 different subunits around to look after. Because I started talking in my spare time about this effort, and of course everyone was laughing at me. One day the boss heard all the news. He come into me and he said, John, you're here as a member in charge of 11 areas. Men under you are laughing at you. Now, we have 3 options. A, pack your bags and go. B, shut up. C, do it. So I thought on it a minute and I said, well, I like my job,
so I don't want to go. B, I can't shut up. C, I'll do it. So they said, well, what do you want? I said, we want to press, argon oven, magnetite. All right, we've got all that here. What else do you want? I said, the ingredients. Well, you tell us the ingredients, we'll get them.
With this opportunity, John Searle's knowledge of electricity and magnetism grew to a point where he began to theorize the startling behavior of his generator. One such theory in magnetism met with stiff resistance and would help to form the genesis of mockery and ridicule that follows him to this day.
My magnetism is not your magnetism.
Could it be that general magnetism contains multiple bands, a magnetic spectrum, exactly the same as white light contains a spectrum of colors?
Magnetism is identical to light. In a way, that's how I look at it. They're identical, they're pairs.
John Searle used a combination of AC and DC current when magnetizing the components of his generator.
If we isolate the particular band we want and then print that, we have something different, we have a wave.
This is the Searle effect, the intersection of two magnetic fields creating a magnetic wave that can be measured and amplified. John Searle designed a generator using magnetic fields to induce a flow of electrons from a rare earth element through a system of rotating magnetized components so that those electrons would be collected, compressed, used, and recycled. Magnetic forces and electrons in motion, the two key issues necessary for the production of electricity.
Here I am. They won't come and see that what I say is true. There is a condition where you can get a wave in a magnetic sense, like a wave, a sine wave, and they act as a river. Now they're stationary until reaction effects takes place, and to do that you have to set a cylinder on it, magnetize, and then that wave goes into motion. Now the roller placed on that field, it floats. We know it cannot touch that, it's too dense with energy, so it will float. So we got something floating there, then if this wave is moved due to reaction between this plate, this roller and this plate, then that wave is going to carry that regardless. So the roller maintains still its constant height. Though it's now running many times faster, it does not fly off.
The magnetic field is holding the roller tightly to the plate. At the same time, the electrons moving through the layered elements are collected and compressed on the surface of the plate, lifting the roller and creating space between the roller and the plate.
So the roller flies round and doesn't roll round. As it moves, the field is being rewritten all the time. So the field never diminishes. It cannot diminish because a magnetic field is in constant running order.
The energy or electrons moving through the system recycle. The rare earth element attracts new electrons that also move through the system and recycle. Because of their negative charge, the electrons compress, causing the drop in temperature and creating the energy field that radiates from the generator.
In 1956, I was soldering. I had to produce another unit, and this time we wasn't powering it up. I wanted to try to meter up things to see what the oscilloscope was showing me. And it was accidental that when I took the hot iron to solder the wire on, I couldn't solder it. Something from the machine was cooling things faster than you could heat them. That was accounting for some of the behavior of those early models. Counted for why, when I got a hold of it, I was stuck to it.
John Searle created a generator design that became a superconductor, producing extreme cold and incredibly high voltage that caused it to lift off the ground. But could he control this flying disc generator? In the late summer of 1954, he left Midland's Electric Board and moved to Berkshire near Pangbourne.
Walk up, we see the actual field. This field is the field where
it's joined to the land, I could get onto it. The beauty of it, as you see, is quiet, nice and open. Here I would do experiments.
Experiments to discover how to control the flying disc generator.
You see, we use gyro technology. Now, gyro, there's only one problem about the gyro is that you can't put it at the rim of the craft, right on the rim, because you've got to control it by striking it from outside of it. You can't do good striking on the inside because it don't do nothing. It won't respond. But if you strike a gyro on the outside, it tips at that point, instant.
The inside of the flying disc generator was equipped with switches and circuits to activate 64 hammers positioned around the rim.
It was in this field we solved that problem.
So which way would they fly?
Down this way, or over the trees and around. It depends whether it was late evening or day. If it's daytime, we go over the trees. When it starts getting dark like this, you could run up and down this. The chance of vehicles coming up there was very unlikely.
John Searle's time here was short. By 1955, he moved his family to 17 Stevens Close, Mortimer, Berkshire. But now he could control the flying disc generator.
And I haven't been here for a very long time, but that was where my early days experiment was done. That's before we used Warminster area for the big work. We built a total of 41 crafts that actually flew and were fully controllable. There were 6 before that were lost. They could not be controlled.
During the 1950s, John Searle continued to experiment with his flying disc generator, but it needed a name.
One thing I didn't know was that gravity can be inversed. No scientists ever had come up with that idea. That clearly the magnetic field was completely different to the magnetic fields we knew of.
The heavy rollers spinning as they rotate around the plates acted like a flywheel and caused a gyroscopic effect. The extremely high voltage created a dense field surrounding the generator, a device built with individually magnetized components.
It was a device, and it contained all these signs within it. You've got the gyro, cyclotron effect, a frequency control, magnetic, electrons, photons, basically nearly every science involved in one engine.
Incorporating these principles displayed by the device, he christened it Gyro Flywheel High Energy Density Mechanical Magnetic Device, but it would soon be known as the Levity Disc.
And the first successful one was launched in 1956. It went up, we flew it across the houses, because Crompton Hill, we're up above the houses. It's a wonderful sight, you should go there. And we flew this over the rooftops, and then we had a surprise. You'll see, we saw the tiles waving as it went along, and the din that made it in the middle of the night was absolutely fantastic. And the reason is, of course, there's a suction underneath this. It's in a wave, this suction is, and it pulls these tiles up and down. Some fall to the ground, obviously. But what we also found is that when pigeons or birds flew near to it, or they were taken by surprise and they got caught, they fell to the ground. And of course, they hit the ground and break their necks. So you saw in the papers, birds died from UFO. And made it quite clear to them it was not a UFO. The government knows. It's identified. They know what it is. Every government knows what it is. They've known it for years. I said, so we're dealing with something in reality.
By 1956, the first team of investors agreed to fund John Searle and the research on his Levity disc. This group of 13 pensioners assembled as a club called Launch Unit Navigable Individually Controllable, or Lunic Enterprises.
And we toyed with this down in Warminster, where we built these, what was labelled UFOs. We called them Levity discs.
but we built this. Now, 13 old-age men backed that project, and they only backed me on the following condition, that I did not go commercial with this. They didn't want any problems with taxman. They were doing this for fun. But to me, that was all right. It was giving me a chance to experiment, work out ideas, to prove two things. It could hold together, and it could fly. Okay. And this is what we proved.
That it could hold together and it could fly. The device as an electric generator for domestic use became an afterthought. John Searle knew this was the beginning of his lifelong battle with official persons and with the scientific community. Very soon, British civil aviation had questions about the levity disk. What happens if the power fails? How do you steer it? And the big question, how does it fly?
You've got to put a load, resistance load, on the generator to speed it up. And once it starts, you get to about, on average, about 1 million volts. It begins to really build up a charge. Then this superconductivity switches in, and the Earth pushes it up. But it's also affecting the atmosphere above it. It is making it pull to the rim and rotate with the field. So you've got like a hurricane effort. It's sucking it up. Over the years, we experimented with many ideas. The trouble was the authorities said that we could not fly this device in public, on show, unless we made some means to control it in event of power failure. We call this a flight cell, and what we've done is that all around the vehicle we've chopped it into 64 sections in which we can open a section. The idea was that by opening one you could direct the angle. Across to the past, the smallest flying machine we could fly, which would be controllable by ham operators, was a 21-footer.
The need for a craft that large was because anything smaller than that couldn't hold the vacuum tubes or valves, as John calls them, or the transformers or the radio equipment. There just wasn't enough room. Also, in order to direct this craft, it needs certain electronic solenoid equipment and some hydraulics.
In those days, we had to use very large bottles, big heavy transformers, big chokes. They all take up a mass of relays. And there was a GPO type. They were very large. So we're looking at a massive weight.
64 flight cells at the rim of the levity disk could be opened or closed independently, changing the energy flow, which caused the disk to tilt and turn, to accelerate or stop, to gain or reduce altitude. Signals to the flight cells were sent using ham-operated radio. The command signal was always preceded by a coded radio signal to prevent outside interference.
Ham operators, and I must admit that without their help, this could not be done. You have to have some signal coming from it to be able to trace it.
If you have a series of ham radio operators that are willing to help you. And the professor did. John would call them and tell them when the unit should be, when the disk should be over their position, and then have them, it also emitted a beacon so they could triangulate on it, and then make a course correction that he would tell them the code to use. So they would give a frequency code to the ship. It would make a course correction if needed to go wherever he wanted. And he had a whole series, whole network of hams all across the world.
I used 1,200 cycles for my transmitter carrier. That's why the authorities came after me when they saw the transmitter I was using on television.
Yeah, it was military.
We got to confiscate that. That's illegal. We have no rights to that. So I said, well, if you take that away, how do I protect the public from this massive weight up there? This equipment gives me the carrier of 1,200 cycles a second. I need that to carry my information to that craft so I could continue transmitting and carrying out this flying research work.